Maybe I ought to get on the stage. There, I'm on stage. Uh, where, where the world, where the, I think the world, this planet we live on, is about to spin out of orbit with the kind of things that are going on. I'm going to hit the whole world rapidly, the latest stuff that's going on, and then I want to spend some time talking about Greenland and Cuba, because that's where I think the major attention is going to be here, especially with the target that Trump has put on Cuba, and swearing with all of the gravity that he has to do so, that Cuba is not going to get a drop of Venezuelan oil. Well, I'll tell you, this is now that international law is gone, and now that it's right by might, or might makes right, and that Trump has said he does not follow international law. International law means nothing to him. He is now judged by himself and his own sense of morality, and that's the only limiting factor that he has in his life. What a way to get 2026 started. I want to briefly mention, I think we made a couple of new patient appointments yesterday, 2 more, at this half-price fee. I'm just going to keep it going a little bit longer. I think this week is filled up, but there is time before the end of the month to take advantage of this. It's just that what's involved is a clear, well-defined consultation, a very clear explanation of what I do and why. If you decide you want me to take care of you, films are taken. An analysis of those films is made so that I know what to do, because I have no idea what to do for you without detailed x-ray analysis. And then a correction to the spine is made based on that analysis. And then after I feel like I've made it, we take some follow-up films to make sure that that spine has come back into alignment, which is visible. I mean, you don't have to be a radiologist to see the changes in your x-rays as you see your spine come back into alignment. And then an extra visit, a follow-up visit is all included in the fees, which is 1/2 of what it used to be. So you would call the office 801-523-1890, or you can go to jackstockwell.com and schedule online, and the ladies will get to you and take it from there. All right, now, as I said, I almost think the planet's going to spin out of orbit. It seems like every utterance of President Trump is increasing that angular rotation that could throw us out of orbit. I mean, as a matter of fact, most people are trying right now just to hold on to their seats, that they're not in danger of falling off the surface of this world themselves. The latest remarkable statement by President Trump is a note that he wrote to Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Støre, in which he said he is no longer concerned with peace. Now, the message reads this, and you may be familiar with it. If you haven't heard this verbiage, you need to. But writing to the president of, the Prime Minister of Norway, he said this: "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China, and why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There's no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there also. And I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding," and so forth and so on. And then he said, "The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President DJT." Now, I'm only a budding young man of 75, and I have been watching presidents since the first president I voted for, Richard Nixon, and I have been watching them ever since. I don't remember ever hearing a president talk like that. But then again, he wasn't a politician. He didn't come from the political class. He wasn't raised correctly in party politics. And so he's kind of like the proverbial loose cannon. And so I am constantly entertained. Every morning I wake up, or the last thing, I'm reviewing the news before I go to sleep, to see what the latest drama is. Now, in line with what he just said, I mean, his argument is that given the fact that there's no document whereby Greenland actually belongs to Denmark, I mean, only some boats that had landed there hundreds of years ago. The fact that now American ships are landing there, he says, is the same thing. I mean, that's rather an incredible argument, but it is unfortunately backed by current reality and current actions. So in line with that is the so-called Planned Peace Council of the United States. Now, of course, I know you've heard about this. The Peace Council of the United States, where a number of people in this Peace Council are Kushner, Rowan, Blair, Marco Rubio, Witkoff, World Bank Chief Banga, and various others. But with that full list, which is not yet complete, will be put a list forward which will be made known in the upcoming World Economic Forum in Davos. And Trump said that this is going to be the most important, most prestigious council which ever existed. So according to the Financial Times, panic has erupted in the international community that Trump wants to use this council as a potential replacement for the United Nations, to use it as a parallel, unofficial committee for solution of any conflict, even outside of Gaza. Then they quote Stephen Miller, who said that after, the whiny bird peeping by the Europeans, because I love that, the whiny bird peeping by the Europeans because of Venezuela, it's now clear that the United States, according to Stephen Miller, is a superpower and is going to act like one. He said that the international law is something for weaklings. Now just get the gravitas here. The Deputy Chief of Staff is saying there's no such thing anymore as international law, and that international law is something for weaklings. He said this. This is Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff. They can talk about international niceties, but we are living in a real world where power, force, and authority are determining actions. These are the unavoidable laws of this country. Now, I thought it was the Constitution, but obviously I'm wrong, because the White House is saying the unavoidable laws of this country are power, force, and authority. Then naturally, Trump's famous statement that he does not respect international law on top of this. So this is obviously one element why everything is in motion. I mean, literally everything. The fact that now the Europeans, or some Europeans, want to talk to Russia probably is one ingredient that has this recognition that when the United States goes on a path of complete lawlessness, then by comparison, Russia is starting to look like a haven of security. So now Western leaders are talking about sitting down with Russia because they know the United States has abandoned them. And they also know that if the United States takes Greenland by force, that'll be the end of NATO, because no NATO nation is going to respect Article 5 and come to the aid of Greenland. I mean, the way you measure the force of anything is the power of enforcement behind it. And if one of the most important articles of the United Nations is that the members come to the aid of the mouse that roared, then and they don't do it, then there's no teeth, no bite to the power of enforcement. Therefore, the thing is just a good idea. Now, the latest one who expressed something like that is former NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg, who yesterday was urgently calling for resuming the dialogue with Russia and communicating with Putin like your next door neighbor. Now, you never heard anything like this a week ago, 2 weeks ago, out of anybody as a European leader. And now they're saying, hey, you know what? Putin's about to gobble up the last pieces of Ukraine. Maybe it's time we sit down and actually talk to these people. I mean, this is really a whole new tone. And I think it reflects the degree of freak out that is going on in the Western nations, Western European nations. Now, yesterday, there was in a talk show that took place in Germany. Martin Schulz, who's the former chancellor candidate, former head of the SPD, when asked if this was the greatest crisis that the transatlantic alliance has ever faced, he said, absolutely. And then when the whole discussion escalated somewhat, he said, when you see Trump, he said, today it's Venezuela, tomorrow it's the whole world. Excuse me, I'm still a little bit hoarse. And which was a famous statement by the Nazis, of course. And in general, it's forbidden to even repeat sentences like that in Germany. But he did. So it'll be, it'll be interesting to see if there's a reaction to that he equated Trump with Hitler. And that's the level of the debate right now. And it's also a new level of escalation coming from Scott Bessent, who said the U.S. is going to take Greenland because of European weakness. The Secretary of the Treasury. We're going to take Greenland because Europe is too weak to stop us from doing it. See, international law has gone out the window. And he said that Washington partners will eventually come around, and that's the message he said from there. Now, the Washington partners, speaking of the press, the media, and the party politicians who are trying to use this as an example to hurt Trump. I don't know if you can hurt Trump now. Now, did you happen to watch the game last night? The championship, the college football playoff championship game. Right at the very beginning of the game, the camera went to one of the loges, glassed-in areas, and there was Trump and his family. And as soon as that hit the big screen for the stadium, the largest roar of the entire night took place. And I mentioned it yesterday, I have some rather close friends who think I've completely gone off the deep end that I would dare criticize the president. Because they think anything he does right now is God sent. And then that roar that I heard last night, I thought the Republicans had something to worry about in the midterms, but not according to what I heard on that screen on TV last night. Now, obviously, this is causing all kinds of discussions because if the United States takes Greenland militarily, as I said earlier, that will be the nail in the coffin for NATO. And this is expressed by an example of a person named Metz Nielsen, who's a senior analyst at the Dissident Club, who said this: Trump's actions were legally very incoherent and very political. It might have worked well in the 19th century and early 20th century, but since the mid-20th century, territorial sovereignty is inseparable from the will of the people who inhabit it. Well, there's talk all over, there are talk shows all over and programs about the end of NATO. So I think you can get out your treasures of truth and write that down as of January 20th. With what Trump said yesterday, that'll probably be the end of NATO. Not that we need NATO. NATO should have been over with back in at the 1991, at least, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Putin had some days ago, he had this discussion or speech in front of 32 new ambassadors. And he lamented the principle of might makes right. And he didn't mention Trump or anybody else by name, but it was obvious who he was talking about. And he spoke of the importance of international law and that the West violated the legitimate interests of Russia by moving the NATO bloc closer and closer to the Russian border, contrary to official promises, which had been given not to do that. Now, it may be that there's more to it than that, but that is part of this whole new European architecture. There will be some discussions on this question. We'll just kind of have to wait and see if some of these Western leaders actually sit down with Trump and Lavrov and work out some kind of peace agreement to end this Ukrainian war without consulting the United States. Now, there is also alarm everywhere about the threat by Trump to impose new tariffs on 10% of European firms. The German auto industry is saying that there would be just a big increase in the massive consequences, more job losses, more insolvencies. The European Union is now saying that they may consider counter sanctions against the United States that would amount to 93 billion altogether. And it's an absolute insane escalation. And there is now, for the first time in Der Spiegel that came out yesterday, an article in which they say the USA under Trump worries about fascism in the United States after the ICE terror. And they report that in social media, there is now a graphic in which the dots are being replaced by swastikas. The Guardian, out of London, also had an article saying that there are more and more fascist signs of what Trump is doing, the breach of international law, the independence of justice, the freedom of opinion, cultural institutions, universities, science, also the attempt to destroy important data and scientific information, would be all characteristics of a new fascism. And then Spiegel concludes that Trumpismo, that's what they called him, very clearly shows fascist criteria. Now, the situation in Iran is still in the danger zone, even so there was apparently, after the huge demonstrations had erupted, instigated by foreign agents, Mossad, mind you, with the help of Starlink communications, the Iran government had neutralized Starlink and promised not to kill more demonstrators. Then Trump pulled his supposed planned attack back, apparently after Netanyahu demanded it, but the danger is not over by any means. There's still a major aircraft carrier deployment of at least 2 big aircraft carriers in the region. So an attack on Iran certainly is not off the table. Now, in respect to Venezuela, it's now reported that the U.S. did, according to Reuters, for whatever that's worth, they report that there were secret negotiations between the United States and the Venezuela Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, already months before, in which Cabello, whose name is also in the indictment document as a drug pusher, nevertheless, months ago was asked by Washington to not use the armed forces in order not to create a chaotic situation for Delcy Rodriguez. So in any case, that still needs to be verified. But, it seems that would also show that who would be the traitor or the negotiator on the Venezuelan side. Otherwise, after this big show with the White House and all the CEOs of all the big oil companies, it doesn't look so good because these oil companies do not want to invest in Venezuela. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips said that they're not ready to invest because of the very big risk that Trump actually hasn't made Venezuela safe yet for American oil interests to go in there and take back what Trump says is our oil. So that's not going very well. Otherwise, the whole system's in disarray. It's not just between the US and Europe, it's also within the European Union, where now there are major articles in the French media expressing concerns about the tempo and the size of the German armaments, as Merz is taking money out of social expenditures for the country of Deutschland and putting it into rearming the German army. And what they're concerned about is that the AfD would win the next government. Now just think about this. The AfD, the alternate for Deutschland, the Trump version of the German political culture, make Germany great again, almost won the last election, only by a few points. And the swing in the population of Germany is swinging to the right more and more all the time, where Germany has usually been a very liberal government. And they don't like the new laws that are coming down, shifting social money to armament money, and the heavy influence that the German army is placing on high school students to come and join the German army with all kinds of deals, cash deals, special promotions, pick whatever you want to do. The army life is for you. And what the AfD, what the more liberal arm of the German government is saying, that if the AfD does win the next election, they could demand back the Alsace and Lotharingen that was lost in World War II. Does that sound familiar? So Bloomberg reports that Paris is looking with a big worry on this. They worry about the militarization and the future of NATO, that if the German arms industry would become the strongest on the European continent, it would lead to a weakening of the French armament industry. And they say that obviously if either Le Pen or Bardella would be the next government, that would speed up the AfD access to power. Normally, it would be 2029 in the next federal election, but it could come quicker depending on what goes in France. Now, it may be somewhat worrisome, but it also may lead to a whole new relationship with Russia. Now that the United States seems to be less and less concerned with fighting the Russians through their proxy NATO war, and Trump turning his back on the European Union, they may start listening, as I reported earlier in the hour, to what the Russians have to offer as far as a new security agreement for Europe would be. Because they know Putin does not want the rest of the Ukraine. Putin does not want Europe. Russia has enough problems of its own. It doesn't need to be out grabbing more territory. Now, there was this court ruling in the Karlsruhe High Court in Germany, whereby they made a ruling on the background of the person who is now charged with the Nord Stream sabotage. And they said, in a reversal of what has been said by the government so far, that because of the sabotage of Nord Stream 1, half of the energy required by Germany on an annual basis was destroyed. You all know that. We've been over this many times. Therefore, it was of central significance for the official energy supply for Germany. And that, among other things, was connected to a danger of the loss of trust by the population, and as a consequence, there were violent developments. In any case, the formulations were very strong. While they do not go all the way like Seymour Hersh did, it clearly should require an action by the government. And if it will, that is naturally the other question. But how open and how far they're going to go is to be seen. Now, coming back to the French situation, Florian Philippot, the head of the Patriot Party, put out a statement saying, let's put an end to the general paranoia and resume dialogue with Russia. It's not just some of the smaller members of NATO saying this. Now, why would this? Think about this. Why would they want to be sitting down with Russia? Because they know Ukraine lost the war. And it's just a matter of time, if the Ukrainian army doesn't lay down their weapons and go home, that Russia will take more territory, everything up to the Dnieper, including Zaporizhia, Kherson, and start moving toward Kyiv. Because they said if the people don't get rid of the Nazi regime in Kyiv, we'll do it. And we're not going to do it through negotiations. Now, this fellow, who's the head of the Patriot Party in France, says we need to start talking with Russia, lift the sanctions, and restart trade with Russia. This is unheard of just a few weeks ago. What they were talking about a few weeks ago are medium-range missiles being delivered from Germany into Ukraine. Now, this Patriot Party had already denounced the European Commission plan to establish a permanent European army as opposed to a serious danger to the peace in Europe. This is what happens when you have an awakening population, something we don't have here in this country. No, I was glued to the game last night as much as anybody else. I love college football. It was my hope and desire that Indiana would win, and at the last interception, they wrapped it up. But I don't spend all my time in sports. I spend some time in other things, like world affairs, that I try to bring to my radio show. And of course it's got my bias, and of course it has my slant and my view. But now you've got a rising party in France, which is it's not like Le Pen, but it's very close. And they want to reestablish the individual nation of France. And the leaders of this realize that Putin means business. But Putin is not going to trust anything the West ever has to say to them again, especially President Trump, after President Trump was involved in the assassination attempt with the 91 drones against Putin. Because just before the attack happened, President Trump was on the phone with Putin. Now, podcasters and armchair generals are saying that President Trump called him so they could triangulate the exact location of Putin's phone so they would know where to send these drones. And of course, Trump denied having anything to do with it. But as they recovered some of the parts of the drones, as I talked about in earlier shows, printed circuits hadn't been destroyed in the wreckage when they were able to get into them. And it shows that they were guided by American satellites to their target. Now, how is that not America involved in an assassination attempt on Putin? And then, of course, Putin turns around and launches the Oreshnik. And I think there's more Oreshniks to come. So now, something that 2 weeks ago I would never have imagined. You have Macron in France, Meloni in Italy, Merz in Germany, Stoltenberg, former Secretary General, all demanding that Europe start resuming discussions with Russia. because, because they can see the writing on the wall. They can see what's happening. And you better sit down and talk to this behemoth, this Leviathan, this juggernaut that is coming your way with greater warfare sophistication than anything that NATO possesses. Because NATO does not have hypersonics. I just get a kick out of seeing this stuff, how the wind can change 180 degrees overnight. And despite the fact that nobody trusts what Mertz says, because he can contradict it, maybe not quite as quickly as Trump contradicts himself, but he has a record of saying the opposite very quickly, within 24 hours. And he made this statement before the Chamber of Commerce in Halle, obviously feeling the pressure from the German industry. But, we'll keep an eye on this, watch how this develops. Now, in the United States, the situation around Minnesota is extremely tense. The so-called U.S. War Department, I still think of it as the Department of Defense, because I think it's going to require congressional action to change the name. But the War Department has announced that an additional 1,500 U.S. troops will be ready to be deployed in Minneapolis. Now, that's quite an escalation. And these are the major headlines this morning. I think that overall situation can only be described following the lead of President Trump as a complete breakdown in international law. It's getting to a point where it's every country for itself, every man, every woman for themselves. And so the effort to move this so-called peace council, not only for Gaza, but for conflict resolution, I think is coming to an end. Trump even invited Putin to be part of it. This new council he's putting together that he thinks is going to replace the United Nations. He wants Putin to be a part of it. See, this is part of that flip-floppy stuff that Trump does that still catches me off guard. Sometimes I think he's losing his mind and he is as non-compos mentis as Biden was. And then all of a sudden, I see this evidence of this really super wily fox that just tries to keep everybody off target, offset, off balance, while he continues to wangle his way through the whole process of pissing people off, keeping them upset, keeping them in a state of psychological imbalance, and then comes out with this peace council that he wants Putin to be a part of. I mean, this is the definition of incoherence. And it's got fault lines all over the place. So the Bundeswehr, by the way, was pulled out of Greenland in less than 2 days. The German army, I think it was less than 24 hours. They landed. Oh my goodness, it's cold here. So they went home. Supposedly because of the weather, but that's probably just a pretext. But I think we're sitting on a volcano right now. And there's steam coming out of the dirt under our feet. I mean, nobody knows what's going to be the next sudden move. But I think that everybody is reassembling and reassessing where they're standing when you see European leaders now who were denouncing Putin, as an effort to reestablish the old Soviet empire. Now they're saying, hey, we better sit down and talk to this guy before it's too late. Let's reestablish trade. Well, there's only one way that can happen, is if the war stops. And the only way that war is going to stop at this point is if all outside help stops. Not just the United States, but all the other countries involved. So, what are you going to do about it? What have you been doing about it? This declaration, what is not yet ready, but is also not yet totally needed for this offensive is this declaration. And while 8 of the 11 have agreed to sign it so far, there are arguments from most of the participants as to what they want changed. And it's clear, given the fact that they may come from very diverse backgrounds, be in the UN or whatever government group or whatever background, they have different expectations as to what can be done. So as I say, on the one hand, we are standing on a steamy ground at the top of a volcano. I think there's still some fantastic opportunities for stepping away from the nuclear midnight clock and for establishing some kind of peace, because there's no peace like the kind of peace money deals can bring. And Russia has all this gas that they're willing to turn back. They've offered several times to turn the gas back on. And Europe is saying, no, there's no trucking with the enemy. Putin is evil. Putin is the devil. Putin is Satan. Putin is the Antichrist. And we just have to keep supplying the Ukrainian army with enough armament and enough money, some of which actually gets to the soldiers. And this whole nightmare can come to an end. So I'm sitting here Tuesday morning pontificating at K-Talk Radio. And again, I do not take this privilege lightly. I really appreciate the trust to let me get on here and say the things I want to say. But I'm as optimistic this morning as I've ever been that world peace can yet be established. Now, there's a couple other things I want to mention in relation to all of this before I get to Greenland and Cuba. But the concentration of both wealth and power in the hands of a small group of billionaires is not only obscene, it's incredibly dangerous. So according to a January 19th report yesterday by Oxfam titled, "Resisting the Rule of the Rich, Protecting Freedom from the Billionaire Power." You might want to take a look at that. You can Google Oxfam, Oxfam, or the title, "Resisting the Rule of the Rich." And since U.S. President Trump's return to power, billionaires have succeeded in tripling the speed of their wealth accumulation compared to the previous 5 years. In just this first year, 20th, wasn't the inauguration on the 20th last year? The billionaires have tripled their money in the last year compared to the previous 5 years. This rate of growth was the highest in the US, but billionaires around the world are also seeing double-digit increases. And since 2020, the wealth of billionaires has grown by 81%. There are now over 3,000 billionaires in the world with a combined wealth of 18.3 trillion. While at the same time, 1 in 4 people in the world, their food source is insecure. Now, the report warns that this concentration of wealth is being used to shape and influence politics, you think, to influence and shape societies and economies. The billionaires are not only just buying lots and private jets, yachts and private jets, but also political movements. They're buying social media platforms. They're buying newspapers. and more than a few politicians. And there may have always been this connection between money and power, but it's never been this brazen, this open. And while the ultra-rich gain more power and influence, this report says from Oxfam, quote, all over the world, we're seeing an erosion and rolling back of the civil and political rights of the many, the suppression of protests, and the silencing of dissent. Now, Max Lawson, that was a co-author of this report, said this: governments worldwide are making the wrong choice, choosing to defend wealth over freedom, choosing the rule of the rich, choosing to repress their people's anger at how life is becoming unaffordable and unbearable. Well, that's what happens when money rules. It was very important for the founders of this country that the Constitution was organized in such a way that the voice of the moral minority, in the sense of financial gain, had just as much power as the rich in the formation of laws in this country, through the concept of a constitutional republic and representative government. You didn't have to be rich to have influence with the king. But that's all changing now. And the biggest flaw in the report, this fixed view of inequality in the world, China is the most successful country right now in the world at ending poverty. Yet the report completely ignored their progress. And the report's simple-minded conclusion calls for the redistribution of wealth as the only way to end global poverty, which is absolutely the wrong idea. And how to produce the goods for a dignified life for all humanity is never considered. It's just we need to take the wealth from the wealthy and redistribute it among the poor. Where have you heard that philosophy before, and how well did that work? Chief of Staff Stephen Miller is saying that only the U.S. can defend Greenland. Defend Greenland from what? Killer whales? No, they're trying to create a picture where they want you to believe that Russia and China will take Greenland if we don't. So according to White House, Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, power trumps sovereignty, especially in the Arctic. He said this: the new domain of international competition is going to be polar competition. Now, he said this the other night on Sean Hannity. He said, that is where more and more resources are being spent by our nation's adversaries and rivals, is the ability to control movement, navigation, lanes of travel in the polar and Arctic region. He said that because Denmark cannot defend Greenland, claiming weaknesses in their military and their economy, he said they shouldn't have claim to the land. Because they can't defend it, they shouldn't have claims on it? He said to control a territory, you have to be able to defend a territory, improve a territory, inhabit a territory. Denmark has failed at every single one of these tests. Look how they justify imperialism. My goodness. He claimed the U.S. was already on the hook to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to defend Denmark as a NATO ally. He says it's a raw deal, it's an unfair deal, and most importantly, it's unfair to the American taxpayer, who has subsidized all of Europe's defense for generations now. Well, while that's true, that's not necessarily an argument to abscond with another country through American military dominance. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent similarly argued that the U.S. is not going to back down on taking over the Greenland because, he said, the continent is too weak to ensure its own security. There's that same argument. Bessent has all but dismissed the European Union's threats to halt a tariff deal reached between Trump and the bloc last year He said this to NBC News, Meet the Press on Sunday, that Trump is using strategic leverage to get what he wants. Might makes right. It's no longer might for right. It's might makes right. And he said, first of all, the trade deal hasn't been finalized, and an emergency action can be very different from another trade deal. He said Trump leverages his emergency powers to do this. So Bissett cited global competition in the Arctic and the U.S. plans for a Golden Dome missile shield as reasons for the U.S. to acquire Greenland. And he says Trump is not bluffing. He said the president believes enhanced security is not possible without Greenland being part of the U.S. Well, you can build this Golden Dome all you want. It's not going to stop a hypersonic missile. These things gain altitude, and they come down at Mach 10, about 7,500 to 8,000 miles an hour. That means a hypersonic missile launched from San Diego could reach Nova Scotia in 30 minutes. Some European leaders have warned that the U.S. taking Greenland could spell the end of NATO. Bissett then said in response to that on NBC the other night, the European leaders will come around and they'll understand they need to be under the U.S. security umbrella as well. Well, that's what you can do, and that's what you can say when you got the biggest stick in the neighborhood. I was going to mention this really quick, but I don't have time. New York City may restart investigating in Israeli bombs. This is from the Financial Times. City Controller Mark Levine said that Israel's bonds have performed very well and remain investment grade rated. Now, Mamdani, of course, has said the city should not have a fund that is invested in the violation of international law. In other words, Israel is in violation of international law and should not be investing in them. But I thought, it's kind of interesting to see the parts of the city government going around the mayor. I mean, that's crazy. All right, now a couple more things. Fentanyl overdose in our country is declining. A sharp decline, in fact, has taken place. I don't have time to get into that. So I want to move into this other stuff. Especially the Imperial crosshairs moving to Cuba. I was reading Caitlin Johnstone's blog the other day, and she sometimes is on Napolitano's podcast. A very brilliant woman, very insightful. And she lives in Australia, but she's former American military. And she's talking about Trump and posting his threats to Cuba on his social media platforms, saying that Havana had better start negotiating with Washington now because the U.S. is in control of Venezuela and because their their oil supply is about to be cut off. Now, the way things usually work in an international scene. When something drastic is about to take place, there's usually some cover stuff going on to take your attention off the matter. Now, the president said this on Truth Social. Venezuela now has the United States of America, the most powerful military in the world by far, to protect them, and protect them we will. There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. Zero. I strongly suggest that they make a deal before it's too late. Now, it's rather incredible how rapidly the empire has been shoving through these long-standing regional domination agendas in the Middle East and Latin America since 2023. We have been hand in glove involved with the incineration of Gaza. We were involved with decapitating Hezbollah. We were involved in the regime change in Syria, the bombings and the regime change ops in Iran, kidnapping Maduro, and now moving on to Cuba. It's just kind of a grab bag type of political dominance that this is what our foreign policy is consisting of now. Grab whatever's available. Now, the Trumpers were sold the story that President Trump would fight the deep state globalists to benefit the ordinary Americans. It's one of the reasons why I voted for him. Now he's advancing every CIA neocon agenda known to man in the Middle East and Latin America with the goal of global domination as life in this country continues to worsen. The bankruptcies, the foreclosures, people without health care, people losing jobs without the possibility of a replacement. But don't worry, don't despair with what I just said, because in 2028 you can elect a Democrat who will spend their entire administration creating the desperate conditions and strife which cause people to vote for the tyrannical Republicans. It's the uniparty. It didn't matter who's in there. I really thought that electing Trump was better than electing Harris. I really thought that if Harris got in there last January, by April we'd be full-scale nuclear war, if not soon. Now, this goes back to what I said about 15 minutes ago about Trump. Either he's non-compos mentis or he's wily as a fox. And he just flat out surprises me sometimes. And where I think he's losing his mind, then he turns around and does something rather intelligent. And now he's bypassing the UN, which I don't think is all that bad an idea, because the UN is impotent because of the UN Security Council's veto of anything the UN wants to do that's good. And who has the strongest card to play in the UN Security Council? Yeah, we do. Why? Because we can sanction anybody we want. Like whack-a-mole. Some country gets a little out of hand, a little uppity, forgets who they are, sanction them. That's the power of the president, the power of the American imperial state. But don't worry, as I said, because in 2028 you can elect a Democrat who will spend their 4 years creating the desperate situation and strife that causes you to vote for Republicans. So anti-war, I like antiwar.com. They usually have some good stuff. Put out this article that said this. Israeli forces kill 19 Palestinians, 15 Palestinians, including 5 children, in attacks across Gaza. About a spate of IDF attacks last Thursday. And that death toll is noteworthy, I think, because that's the same number of people who were killed in the Bondi beach shooting last month. But because they're Palestinian, you haven't heard a word about it. 15 people get killed in Sydney during that Hanukkah celebration, and it monopolizes the news cycle for days. 15 people get killed in Gaza during their so-called ceasefire, and it doesn't get outside the Israeli news, except for a couple of outlets. So the more aggressively the Zionists try to stomp out criticism of Israel, the more necessary it is to aggressively criticize Israel. Now, I'm not just talking about their genocidal atrocities, but they're imposing this direct assault on our own civil rights here in this country. Redefining anti-Semitism, throwing out the First Amendment. So do you support the U.S. empire? If you desire the downfall of the Iranian government in today's present geopolitical reality, then I think you might fall in the camp of those who desire the expansion of U.S. imperial power. It doesn't matter how much lip service you pay to opposing the U.S. machine if you're promoting the agenda of the worst warmongers in the D.C. swamp that we sent Trump in there to clean out. I've got more to say, but we've only got a minute left. I want to remind you of those who desire my services. And who would that be? Anybody suffering from insufferable migraines, headaches, neck pain, shoulder problems, numbness, tingling in your arms that doesn't resolve, pain in the middle of your back between your shoulder blades that hurts standing up 10 minutes, low back pain, sciatica, knee pain. Knee surgery is the most canceled surgery in our office. Just by realigning the spine, it changes the support structure of the knee. It's half off the original fees plus a free follow-up. You'd have to schedule it. Call 801-523-1890 or go to jackstockwell.com and schedule online, and we'll get back to you and take it from there. Lowell's coming up next. Lowell always delivers a good show for us. Tomorrow's a health program, and I am really going to hit the immune system fast and hard tomorrow because I suffered a problem of a little immune weakness myself over the last week, but I'm recovering very fast because of the protocol that I follow that I'll share with you tomorrow. Again, thank you for your listenership. I truly appreciate this opportunity to be a part of this program and a part of the K-Talk family. Now in my 31st year, if you can believe that. So Lowell, again, I'm not sure what to do. I'm going to turn on the previous program that was there. And sir, you kind of take it from there. Well, that's changed. The screen has changed, so I don't have something to put on here. So, Lowell, I am going to dump this in your lap. You take it from here, buddy. And I wish you a good show. I'll see you all tomorrow at 7 a.m.